Hey friends, I'm the storyteller. Before you get too comfortable, do me a small favor, hit like and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy this kind of storytelling. And while you're here, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Kaylee Haywood was just 15 years old when her story began, born in August of 2000 in the peaceful English county of Leicestershire. I'm not entirely sure of the exact village she lived in, but I do know the nearest town to her was Ibstock. And Ibstock, it was one of those places people describe as idyllic. Quiet, friendly, low crime, neighbors who knew each other by name, houses with tidy front gardens, and just an overall sense of safety. It wasn't perfect, of course, but it was the kind of place where you wouldn't expect anything bad to happen. Kaylee didn't live right in the center of Ibstock, but just outside of it, close enough for it to still feel like home. She was one of 7 children, 7. Her parents, Stephanie and Martin, had their hands full, but Kaylee absolutely loved it. The energy, the chaos, the laughter, it was her world. She was especially close to her youngest sister and her mom. And honestly, that's something people always remembered about her, just how family-oriented she was. Kaylee had this big heart. You know, she was warm, bubbly, always smiling. She didn't need 100 friends, just a few really good ones. And the ones she had, she was tight with them. Like most teens in 2015, Kaylee was practically glued to her phone. Social media was her universe, and Facebook was her favorite planet. She was always posting pictures, updating statuses, chatting in group chats, messaging people, accepting friend requests, sending them too. She was social, not just in real life, but online as well. And I think a lot of us can relate to this part. When you're 15, you don't always think carefully about who you're adding online. I mean, I remember doing the same thing, just adding anyone who looked friendly or who had mutual friends. You're not really thinking why someone randomly wants to be friends with you. You just think, oh, cool, someone wants to talk to me. And that's exactly what happened to Kaylee. It was the 31st of October 2015 Halloween. A friend request popped up on her Facebook. The name, Luke Harlow. She didn't know him, didn't recognize the name or the face in the profile picture. But still, she accepted. Maybe she didn't think much of it. Just another name on the list. But not long after, her phone buzzed again. A message from her new friend. Hi, how are you? At first, she was a bit cautious. She didn't dive into the conversation straight away. But still, she replied, Hi, who are you? Luke told her that they had mutual friends of friends. That's always how it starts, right? He said he thought she was beautiful, that he came across her profile, noticed how close they lived to each other, he was in Ibstock too, and figured he'd say hi. And Kaylee, well, she was flattered. This guy was older. She didn't know how much older he was, 27, but clearly older than her. And here he was, telling her she was beautiful, saying he wanted to get to know her. For a 15-year-old girl, that kind of attention can feel big. Especially when you're in that phase of life starting to notice boys. Maybe feeling rebellious, wondering what it's like to be in a relationship. It didn't feel dangerous. It felt exciting. But what Kaylee didn't know, what no one could have known at that point, was that accepting that friend request would change everything. So after that first message, their conversation didn't stop. Over the next few days, Kaylee and Luke kept messaging back and forth all day, every day. It started out pretty casual, but it quickly became flirty. He would compliment her constantly, and while Kaylee would sometimes brush it off or deflect, you could tell part of her was drawn to it. Luke would say things like, "You're so beautiful," or "You're a princess." He'd tell her, "I don't understand how someone like you is still single. I bet all the boys are chasing after you." And Kaylee, she wasn't the type to lap up compliments like that. Whenever he'd call her beautiful, she'd kind of laugh it off, saying, "No, I'm not," or "Stop it." But instead of backing off, Luke would just double down. "Yes, you are," he'd say. "You're stunning, gorgeous. Don't sell yourself short. And look, I know this part might sound small, but psychologically, it's really powerful." She was 15. At that age, your self-image is still fragile. So when someone keeps showering you with validation, it starts to shape how you see yourself. Compliments like that trigger dopamine, those feel-good chemicals in the brain. Every time she got that little rush of validation, she started associating it with him. With Luke, he became her emotional comfort zone. Whenever she had a bad day, if she got into an argument with a friend or a sibling, or just felt off, she'd message him. And every time, he'd be there. He'd take her side, make her feel important. He knew exactly what to say to make her feel seen, and in return, she started craving that attention. Not necessarily Luke as a person, but the way he made her feel. And on top of that, there was this whole element of secrecy. It wasn't just male attention, it was forbidden attention. She knew he was older, and the fact that no one else knew about their chats made it feel like her own little world. A world tucked away in her phone. A world that felt rebellious and thrilling. Luke Harlow, this man she was chatting with, was 27 years old. Very early in their conversation, he asked her how old she was, and Kaylee lied. She told him she was 19. She didn't know exactly how old he was, but she knew he was older, and she also knew that being 15 wouldn't be okay. So she added 4 years, hoping it would make things seem more acceptable. And Luke? He lied too. Not by much, but enough to make the age gap feel less severe. He said he was 26, shaving off a year. On paper, a 26-year-old and a 19-year-old might not raise too many eyebrows. Still a bit of a gap, sure, but technically it's two consenting adults. But of course that wasn't the truth. Kaylee was still a child. And Luke, he knew exactly what he was doing. It only took a few days, literally just a couple, before cracks started to show in the story Kaylee had told. She posted a photo with some of her friends, and they were all still wearing their school uniforms. And of course that didn't match up with what she told Luke. A 19-year-old wouldn't be wearing a school uniform. So Luke called her out. And to her credit, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear, Kaylee came clean. She admitted she wasn't 19, she was 15. Now, that should have been the moment where everything stopped. That should have been where Luke realized how wrong this was and cut off all contact. Blocked her, deleted the messages, reported it, anything. But he didn't. Instead, he just adapted. He told Kaylee that they could still talk, but only if it became their little secret. She wasn't allowed to tell anyone. Not her friends, not her family, no one. He started using fear to keep her quiet, saying things like, "If anyone finds out we're talking, I'll get in big trouble," or "I could go to prison." He knew it was wrong. Of course he did. But instead of doing the right thing, he used that knowledge to manipulate her, to scare her into silence. What started as casual online messaging now had this dark, secretive undertone. And it didn't take long, really just hours after their first conversation, before Luke began hinting at meeting in person. At first, it was subtle, vague. But within a few days, he got bolder, clearer. He told her he wanted to meet up, that she should come to his house, that they could hang out. He painted the picture like it was something innocent. He said they'd watch movies, have snacks, cuddle. It would be a cute little first date. And from Kaylee's perspective, it probably did sound sweet. She was 15, still figuring herself out. Still in that dreamy, wide-eyed phase where you believe in romantic gestures and first kisses and getting butterflies just from a text message. The idea of a movie night with someone who made her feel beautiful, made her feel wanted, it sounded exciting. So she said yes. But then things escalated. Luke said, "What if we get a bottle of vodka?" He made it sound fun, harmless, just a bit of rebellious teenage adventure. And for Kaylee, it made the whole thing even more thrilling. She wasn't just sneaking around with an older guy. She was drinking, doing something grown up, something she knew was off limits. And that feeling, that adrenaline, it pulled her in even more. She didn't realize it yet, but this wasn't a secret romance. It was grooming, and Luke Harlow knew exactly what he was doing. Eventually, the two of them settled on a date. Kaylee would come over to Luke's house. They'd have that movie night, the cuddles, the vodka, just the two of them. That date was the 13th of November, 2015, exactly 2 weeks after Luke had first messaged her. In the lead up to that night, Luke started coaching her, telling her what to say, how to lie to her parents. Because obviously, there was no way they let their 15-year-old daughter go stay at the house of a grown man. So Kaylee told them she was staying at a friend's house. A friend her parents knew. A friend they'd met. That made the lie feel believable, and so they didn't question it. They just let her go. On the day of the meetup, Kaylee asked her parents to drop her off at the local leisure center. Just a regular car park. Nothing out of the ordinary. I imagine she told them her friend had a swimming lesson or some after-school activity and that she'd meet her there before heading back to her house. So they did. Her parents drove her there, dropped her off, and then they left, thinking she was safe. There's CCTV footage from that moment, of Kaylee being dropped off. I don't think the footage has ever been made public, because I haven't seen it myself, not in documentaries, not in news reports, but I've read investigators describe it. She gets out of the car, waits. She watches as her parents' car disappears from view, and once they're gone, she starts walking. She doesn't stay in that car park. She doesn't meet any friends. Instead, she walks down the road toward Luke Harlow's house. So that Friday night, Kaylee was at Luke Harlow's house, and from the outside looking in, nothing seemed off. She was still posting on social media, snapping photos, writing statuses just like she always did. Nothing in her posts suggested distress. Nothing screamed, "I need help." In fact, it looked like she was having fun, like everything was totally normal. By the next day, Saturday, around lunchtime, Kaylee's mom, Stephanie, received a text from Kaylee's phone. It was simple. Kaylee was asking if she could stay another night at her friend's house. And of course, Stephanie said yes. Why wouldn't she? She believed her daughter was safe. She believed she was with a friend she trusted. She had no reason to think otherwise. So she gave her permission, and Kaylee stayed at Luke's house for a second night. But then, Sunday morning came. And that's when everything began to unravel. A local builder was out walking, just heading down the road near Luke Harlow's house, when he noticed something on the ground. A smashed iPhone. It had clearly been dropped or thrown. The screen was shattered. But he picked it up anyway, maybe thinking he could return it to the owner. He checked the recent call log, just trying to find a number he could call, someone who might help him return the phone. He dialed the last number on the list. A teenage girl answered. It was one of Kaylee's friends. That smashed phone, it was Kaylee Haywood's. The builder explained to Kaylee's friend exactly where he'd found the phone, just lying there, smashed, out in the open. But the location didn't make any sense to her. It wasn't anywhere near where Kaylee said she'd be. And besides, it was weird. Why would Kaylee's phone be shattered on some random road? The moment that friend hung up the call with the builder, she did the right thing. She called Kaylee's mom, Stephanie. And as soon as Stephanie picked up the phone and heard what her daughter's friend was telling her, she felt that twist in her gut. You know, the one when your brain hasn't caught up yet, but your body already knows something is very wrong. Because this was the friend Kaylee said she was staying with. And now that same girl was saying, I haven't seen Kaylee since school on Friday. Just like that, Stephanie's world tilted. Her daughter wasn't where she was supposed to be. Her phone had been found broken on some road she didn't recognize, and no one knew where she was. In that moment, she didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and dialed 999. Kaylee was missing. The police came to Stephanie's house almost immediately. They began asking the usual questions. What's Kaylee like? Who does she talk to? Has anything seemed off lately? One of the first things they wanted to know was, did Kaylee use social media? And of course she did. She was a 15-year-old girl in 2015. Facebook was her world. In fact, they said that sometimes teenagers will update their social media before they even update their parents. So if Kaylee had gone anywhere, or planned anything, or felt anything, they figured there might be a trace of it online. The police seized Kaylee's laptop and the iPhone that had been found smashed. They began combing through everything, her messages, her posts, all her recent activity. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. She had posted pictures, statuses, comments. Up until Saturday night, everything looked normal. No signs of distress, no strange posts, just the same bright, bubbly girl her family knew. But then they opened her private messages, and right away, one conversation stood out. Luke Harlow, an older man, much older than Kaylee. His profile looked nothing like hers, no age listed. Of course, he was hiding that. But even just scrolling through his feed, the difference was obvious. His page had posts about drinking, about drugs, adult jokes content that made it very clear he wasn't a teenager. Meanwhile, Kaylee's profile was full of innocent things photos with her friends, silly song lyrics, status updates about school. It was immediately clear to investigators. These two people did not belong in the same social circle. So why were they connected? Why was this grown man messaging a 15-year-old girl? And where was Kaylee now? As police kept digging into Kaylee's messages, the truth of their relationship quickly became clear. It wasn't just a casual online chat. Their messages were flirty packed with kisses at the end, heart emojis, pet names, the kind of messages you'd expect between a couple, not between a grown man and a 15-year-old girl. And then they came across one message in particular. Luke had sent it to Kaylee. It said, "Can I kidnap you forever? Just let that sit for a second." That one line was enough to make the police realize this wasn't just inappropriate, it was dangerous, urgent. So while some officers continued to go through her phone and messages back at the station, others headed straight to Luke Harlow's house. They weren't going to wait, and to their credit, they didn't. They got there within an hour of seizing Kaylee's phone. It was that serious. When they knocked on Luke's door, he didn't try to hide. He didn't act suspicious. In fact, he let them in straight away. Talked to them calmly, almost like he had nothing to hide. Of course, one of the first things they asked was the obvious one. Do you know Kaylee Haywood? And Luke didn't even try to deny it. He admitted that she'd been there. He said she came over on Friday night, stayed the night, and spent most of the day Saturday with him. Then, he claimed, she left on Saturday night. He told police she'd even left behind a few of her things, which he handed over. He said he'd expected her to come back on Sunday, but she didn't. And the whole time he was talking, there was one thing that really stood out to the officer. She kept asking about Kaylee's phone. He was particularly interested in where they'd found it, and if they looked through it, it struck them as odd. Why was he so focused on the phone? Why was that what he cared about, instead of where Kaylee was? Police noted that down right away, because something isn't adding up. And deep down, they were starting to suspect this wasn't just a case of a runaway girl. This was something far, far worse. At this point, I don't believe they arrested Luke Harlow just yet, but they did bring him down to the police station for a proper interview. They needed to walk through everything, every hour, every moment of the weekend, from the second Kaylee arrived to the minute she supposedly left. And during that interview, Luke said something that changed everything. He revealed that on Saturday night, the night Kaylee disappeared, he and Kaylee weren't alone in his flat. There was someone else there, his neighbor, a man named Stephen Beedman. Luke's version of events was this. At some point on Saturday night, Kaylee and Stephen left the flat together. He claimed he didn't know where they were going, and honestly, he didn't even seem that curious. He couldn't remember what time they left. He just said he waited around for about an hour, thinking maybe they'd be back soon. But when they didn't return, he just went to bed, just like that. And when he woke up the next morning, Kaylee still wasn't there. So, according to him, he figured they must have gone back to Stephen's flat. Maybe they came back late, didn't want to wake him, and just stayed there instead. That, he said, was why so many of Kaylee's belongings were still at his place. Because she was planning to come back. Because it wasn't supposed to be goodbye. To police, this opened up an entirely new and terrifying possibility. Now, there wasn't just one older man in Kaylee's life that weekend. There were two. And according to Luke, the last time he saw her, she was leaving with Stephen Beedman. So the police tried to find Stephen fast. They went to his home, he wasn't there, checked his workplace. Nothing. They searched around town, tried to trace his movements, but for hours, Stephen Beedman had completely vanished. And that sinking feeling, it was growing stronger by the minute. Because now, it wasn't just a missing person case. Now, it was a race against time. Eventually, police managed to track Stephen Beedman down. I believe he was at a friend's house or maybe a relative's. Either way, he was there. But Kaylee wasn't. She was still missing. And that absence, that silence, it spoke volumes. At that point, police made the call to officially arrest both Luke Harlow and Stephen Beedman on suspicion of kidnap. The situation was no longer just worrying. It was critical. While both men were now in custody, detectives continued working behind the scenes, combing through every message, every post, every piece of digital evidence they could find. During Luke Harlow's interview, they asked him how he had first connected with Kaylee online. Of course, by then, the police already had the full conversation thread in front of them. They had gone through every word. They knew that Luke's first message had come completely out of the blue. They knew Kaylee had responded with, "Who are you?" because she didn't know him at all. It was painfully clear that there had been no prior connection. That first message, "Hi, how are you?" was the very beginning. But Luke didn't know what the police already had. They were careful. They wanted to hear his version first, to see whether he would lie, to hear how he would try to justify a grown man randomly messaging a 15-year-old girl he'd never met. Because even though they had the chat logs, even though they could see the manipulation unfold message by message, they still needed his words. They still needed to understand what kind of person they were really dealing with. And the deeper they went, the more disturbing everything became. So when police sat down with Luke Harlow and asked him the simplest question, how did he and Kaylee first connect on Facebook? He hesitated. A lot. He mumbled, fumbled his words. Said he couldn't remember who sent the friend request first, just brushed it off as a random ad. Said he had a habit of accepting people he didn't really know, that he had tons of strangers on his list anyway. But the police already knew the truth. He was the one who sent the friend request. He was the one who messaged her first. They had the messages, the timestamps, the exact wording. But they wanted to see how he'd tell the story. Would he own it? Would he try to spin it? And sure enough, he did. Luke told them that once they were connected, they just messaged here and there, nothing deep, just a casual, "Hi, how are you?" kind of thing. But again, the police knew better. They had already read everything. The hearts, the kisses, the compliments, the flirty energy that escalated quickly. It wasn't just small talk, it got intense, fast. And as he spoke, they noticed something else. Luke was moving his hands a lot, using big gestures, over-expressing himself. It's something interrogators see often, people trying to act more confident to sell their story. And while that alone doesn't prove someone is lying, it was just interesting. It added to the feeling that he was trying too hard. The rest of what he said was basically a repeat of what he'd already told officers at his flat. That Kaylee and Stephen Beedman had left the house together Saturday night. That he didn't know where they went. That he just went to bed. That he hadn't seen her since. That he had no idea where Stephen was now. But when it came time to question Stephen Beedman, the tone shifted. Stephen gave police a different story. He said that Luke came to his door at around 7:30 p.m. on Saturday night, just not casual, asking if Stephen had any lemonade or cola, something he could mix with alcohol. Stephen told him no, sorry, he didn't have anything. So then he asked, "Why? What do you need it for?" And Luke told him he had a bird round. For those not familiar with the slang, a bird is how some guys refer to a girl they're romantically or sexually interested in. Luke told Stephen that Kaylee had stayed the night before, on Friday, and that they'd gotten wrecked, drunk, and that they were planning to do it all over again that Saturday night. The way Luke talked about her, like she was just some hookup, just another girl to drink with, but she was 15, and Stephen Beedman knew that. So somehow, at some point that Saturday night, Stephen Beedman ended up at Luke Harlow's flat, and according to him, he wasn't just there for a quick visit. He stayed for hours, drinking with Luke and Kaylee. And this is where the stories completely fall apart. Because remember, Luke had told police that at some point, Kaylee and Steven left the house together and he stayed behind and went to bed. But Steven, he told a very different version. He said he stayed with them for around 4 hours that night, that they were already drinking when he arrived. And it didn't take long before both Luke and Kaylee, especially Kaylee, were so drunk they could barely function. Steven said Kaylee was slurring her words, could hardly keep her eyes open. She couldn't even sit upright. She was that far gone. And Steven, he got bored. He said neither of them could hold a proper conversation anymore, so he decided to just leave. He told police that he left Kaylee there alone with Luke. So now there were two men giving two completely different stories, each one pointing the finger at the other. Each one claiming he wasn't the last person to see Kaylee, which means one of them was lying, maybe both. Either way, the clock was ticking, and the police knew they needed to find real evidence, fast. They launched a massive search effort. Hundreds of officers were mobilized. Foot patrols walked the streets, fields, and woodlands. Helicopters scanned from above. Sniffer dogs were brought in to comb the area. It was one of the largest search operations the region had ever seen, because now this wasn't just a case of finding out what happened. It was a desperate race to save a life. If Kaylee had been kidnapped, and police believed that was very likely, then she was somewhere out there, maybe injured, maybe trapped, and she was all alone, without food, without water. And the two men who might have known where she was, they were both in custody. That meant if she was being held somewhere, no one was looking after her. Time was running out. And then finally, they got their first lead. While the search continued, officers were sweeping a park not far from Luke Harlow's home. And it was there among the overgrowth, in the middle of some bushes, that they found something chilling. A bra. Lying on top of the plants, almost as if it had just been placed there. It wasn't dirty. It wasn't weathered. It hadn't been out there long. In fact, it looked almost brand new. Police didn't need to be told something was wrong. They took the bra back to the station as evidence. And when they brought in Kaylee's mother, Stephanie, to look at it, her reaction said everything. It was Kaylee's, a mother knows. She confirmed without hesitation that the bra belonged to her daughter. And that one piece of clothing, just that small, silent object, shook the investigation to its core. Because Kaylee wouldn't just take off her bra and leave it in a bush. Not willingly. This wasn't just a case of a girl who ran away or changed her mind. This was something darker, something violent. So the investigation escalated again. At its peak, around 500 police officers were involved in the case. And not just police, volunteers, friends, family, strangers, people Kaylee had never met all out searching for her, hoping, dreading, but refusing to give up. Back at the station, detectives were still combing through the endless trail of Facebook messages between Luke and Kaylee. There were 2 weeks worth of nonstop messaging, literally thousands of texts. And the more they read, the worse it got. Luke's messages were highly sexual, graphic, detailed, and these weren't comments made under the false assumption that Kaylee was 19. Because yes, at first, Kaylee had lied about her age. She told Luke she was 19, and that's when the flirting began. But just a few days later, she told him the truth. She was 15. And Luke, he didn't stop. If anything, the messages got more explicit, more frequent. It was like the fact that she was underage, that she was now off limits only, intensified his obsession. Police believed that this was part of his mindset, that the taboo of it all was fueling his desire. By this point, investigators had seized all of Luke Harlow's electronics, his phone, his compute, everything, and what they found was telling. When they compared Luke's phone to Kaylee's, the difference was massive. Kaylee's phone held thousands of messages between them. Luke's, only around 500, because he had deleted everything that could incriminate him, all the conversations about sex, about her age, about meeting up, gone. But they weren't gone from her phone. And that was enough. Then police made another disturbing discovery. There had been no activity from Kaylee's phone after 9 p.m. on Saturday night. No messages, no photos, No social media, nothing. Her phone had just gone dark. And in their gut, the officers knew something happened at 9 p.m. And the thing is, 9 p.m. wasn't a normal time for Kaylee to suddenly go quiet. She wasn't the kind of teenager who just put her phone down and went to bed early, not even close. Like most kids her age, she was glued to her phone, scrolling, messaging, posting, sometimes until midnight, sometimes even into the early hours of the morning. She was the kind of girl who would text while brushing her teeth, who would post a status while lying in bed. Her phone was always in her hand. So for her to just stop at 9 p.m., that was not normal. It wasn't because her phone died. Luke Harlow had the internet in his flat. There were chargers. There was nothing stopping her from using it unless something or someone made her stop. At that point, police were desperate for any new lead. So they started looking deeper into Stephen Beatman's life, talking to anyone who knew him. Friends, co-workers, family members, anyone who could offer insight. And then something surfaced. One of his family members mentioned something that caught the attention of investigators. Stephen had a storage locker, a private unit, just a place to keep stuff outside of the house. And suddenly, the police had a glimmer of hope. Because if Kaylee had been kidnapped, and if just maybe she was still alive somewhere, this locker seemed like a place where she could be held. So they followed that lead fast. They went to the facility and began talking to the staff. And there it was, CCTV footage of Stephen Beatman at the storage site, 2 p.m. on Sunday. The day after Kaylee went missing, he pulled up in his van, parked in front of his unit, and stayed there for a while. The camera didn't catch everything he died either, it shifted angles, or he just sat in his car. But the timeline was enough to raise major alarm bells. Police didn't waste a second. At 3 a.m., they were back at that storage facility, calling up the owner in the middle of the night, asking him to come down and unlock the unit. They had a master key, and they needed to get inside right now. So they opened it, and what they found wasn't what they expected. No Kaylee. The locker was surprisingly neat, just some furniture. A few boxes. Nothing out of place. Nothing hastily shoved in. No weapons. No signs of a struggle. No signs of her. It was a dead end. But still, the fact that Stephen had gone there just hours after Kaylee had vanished, it haunted them. Because now they knew whatever happened to her happened fast. And Stephen Beatman, whether he was hiding something in that locker or just tying up loose ends, was right in the middle of it. And Kaylee was still missing. With nothing found inside the storage locker itself, police began searching the surrounding area. They knew Stephen Beatman had gone there. The CCTV was clear. But maybe, just maybe, that locker wasn't his real destination. Maybe he sat in that van for so long because he was weighing his options, thinking, if I hide something in here, they'll find it straight away. It's too obvious. So investigators started expanding their search. They looked between the lockers, behind them, even outside the gates. Every corner, every shadow. They weren't leaving anything to chance. And that's when they spotted Ida Skip. Basically, a large industrial dumpster meant for clearing out unwanted items from the storage units. And as they started digging through the skip, right there near the top, they found something that made their hearts sink. Women's clothing and a handbag. Once again, the items were taken straight back to the station. And once again, Kaylee's mother, Stephanie, was brought in to identify them. And again, she confirmed it. They were Kaylee's ballings of life. At this point, hope was slipping fast. They had most of her belongings, her bra, her clothes, her bag, but no sign of Kaylee herself, no phone activity, no messages, and two grown men with completely different stories. One of Timur, maybe both were lying, which meant someone was covering something up. And then came the neighbors. Police began canvassing the area around Luke and Stephen's home, stalking to anyone who might have heard or seen something the night Kaylee vanished. And people had. Several neighbors reported hearing screaming. Others described banging noises. But most of them had brushed it off at the time, just assuming it was drunk people fooling around in the street. It wasn't exactly unusual, especially around 3 o'clock in the morning. But one neighbor, one witness, saw something. He told police he thought it was a domestic fight, a couple arguing in the street. What he saw was a man pinning a young woman to the ground. They were shouting, struggling, and then suddenly he let her go. The man started to walk away, but the girl didn't move. She just stayed there, lying on the ground. So the man walked back, picked her up, helped her to her feet, and then this part really stuck. They held hands and walked away together. To this neighbor, it looked like a couple who had a fight, made up, and were going home. So he didn't call anyone. He just turned back inside, closed the door, and went to bed. But now that memory wouldn't leave him, because he was realizing that girl was Kaylee Haywood. When police presented the eyewitness account to Stephen Beatman, they laid it out clearly. They said, "We've got someone who saw a man and a young girl. He pinned her to the ground." They were shouting, "Was that you?" But Stephen denied it. He said it wasn't him, said it wasn't Kaylee, said he didn't know what they were talking about. But officers weren't buying it, because while he sat there trying to distance himself from the scene, they couldn't ignore the state he was in. Stephen had visible injuries, fresh ones, scratches and cuts all over his arms, and 3 more serious marks on his face across his forehead, his nose, and his chin. He tried to play it off. But police knew those injuries weren't just random, so they looked deeper. They started tracing his steps, learning more about his day-to-day life, and one of the things they learned was that Stephen worked outdoors, manual labor, in the fields. So they decided to go and check his workplace, and it's a good thing they did, because out in one of the fields, they found something strange, a bonfire, or more specifically an unlit bonfire, a pile of wood, sticks, and debris, ready to be burned but untouched. It stood out, so the officers started carefully pulling it apart piece by piece, and tucked inside, buried beneath the logs and branches, was a bin liner. A big black garbage bag, and inside that bag, men's clothing, covered in blood. The whole thing was taken straight to the station, sent off for testing, and the results came back exactly what everyone feared. The blood on those clothes belonged to 15-year-old Kaylee Haywood. By now, the case had shifted entirely. Police weren't just dealing with a missing person anymore. They weren't just holding 2 suspects for kidnap. They had something much darker in front of them now. They had Kaylee's blood on Stephen Beatman's clothes, so the charges were officially escalated. Luke Harlow and Stephen Beatman were now both arrested on suspicion of murder. And at this point, all police could do, the only thing left was to find Kaylee's body. Because without her, this story was still missing its most crucial truth. Since the new charge was fresh, the police had the legal grounds to re-question both men, and this time, it was different. The energy in the room had shifted. The stakes were undeniable. The tone was no longer gentle or probing, it was sharp, focused. And under that pressure, Stephen Beatman cracked. He began to talk. For the first time, he admitted that the story he told before, the one about leaving Luke's flat because they were too drunk to talk to him, was a lie. Now, he was saying something else entirely. He claimed that he and Kaylee had decided to go for a walk that night, that they left Luke behind in the flat. And then, he admitted something more chilling. The couple seen that night by the eyewitness, the shouting, the man pinning the girl to the ground, yeah, that might have been us. He tried to spin it, said Kaylee was very drunk, stumbling, falling, and that the moment where the neighbor saw him pinning her down was actually just him kneeling beside her, trying to make sure she was okay. He said he was holding her hand, guiding her, trying to control her a bit better because she couldn't walk straight. He claimed he had no weapons, that nothing violent happened, just a drunk girl and a man trying to help her. But in telling that version, Stephen was also doing something else. He was admitting he had lied. He was admitting that he was the last person to be alone with Kaylee, and he had no explanation for what happened to her after that walk. Police were direct with him. They said, "You've lied. You've been seen with her. We have your DNA, we have her blood, you were with her. She didn't go anywhere else. She didn't come back. She didn't survive. They made it clear, whether he confessed or not, he was going to be found guilty. So they gave him a choice. Keep lying, plead not guilty, go to trial, be found guilty anyway, or tell the truth, plead guilty, show some ounce of humanity, maybe get a slightly lesser sentence. And in that moment, quietly, with no way left out, Stephen Beadman confessed. He admitted to raping and murdering 15-year-old Kaylee Haywood. And when police asked where he left her, he pointed at a map. He showed them the field area with trees, grass, silence, and officers went out to look to finally bring Kaylee home. The place Stephen Beadman pointed to on the map, it wasn't just any open field. It was wild, overgrown. The kind of place that would be hard to search even in broad daylight, let alone in the dead of night, in the middle of November. The grass was high, the ground was muddy, the air was cold and damp. Everything was either frozen or soaked depending on where you stepped. It was the kind of environment that could easily swallow the truth whole. But police couldn't wait. Stephen had confessed on a Wednesday night, and by the time they had the location, it was already dark. It would have been easy reasonable even to wait until morning, to gather a proper team, to do things by the book. But they didn't, because time wasn't the point anymore. Kaylee was out there, alone. So 4 or 5 officers, just the ones who happened to still be at the station, volunteered to go on their own time. No sleep, no shift, just a need to bring her home. When they should have been home with their families, they stepped into that cold, wet night and started searching. And for hours, nothing, just grass, trees, shadows. But then they found her, Kaylee Haywood. Her body lay in that field, alone, cold, exposed. She was completely naked, except for one sock still on her foot. Her body had been dumped there just off the side of the road, like she was trash, left in a position that didn't look accidental or peaceful. She was half on her front, half on her side unnatural, the kind of position no one would ever fall into on their own. It was clear she hadn't just died, she'd been brutalized. The wounds to her head were horrific. She'd been bludgeoned multiple times. There was dried blood matted into her hair, evidence of sustained and violent trauma. But it wasn't just her head. Kaylee had injuries all over her hands and arms, defensive wounds. She had tried to fight. She had tried to survive. She fought until the very end. And even though the officers knew the outcome the moment they saw her, it didn't make it any easier. Because at that moment, this wasn't just a case anymore. It was a child, someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's best friend. And she was gone. By this point, both Luke Harlow and Stephen Beadman had shut down. They didn't want to talk anymore. Luke stuck firmly to his story that he went to bed, and when he woke up, Kaylee and Stephen were gone. That was all he claimed to know. He denied any involvement in what happened to her after that. And Stephen, he wasn't saying much of anything either. He'd admitted to the murder, pointed to the map, but when it came to the details, the how, the why, the exact moment everything changed, he refused to elaborate. He didn't say how many times he hit her, or what weapon he used, or what her final moments were like. He just stopped talking. And so from here on, what we know, what we think happened is built from a combination of evidence, witness accounts, and police theory. It's not complete, but is the best picture we have. Police believe that it was Kaylee who sent that text to her mom on Saturday afternoon asking to stay another night. They believe she really did feel like she was having a good time that weekend. For most of it, she felt safe, maybe even excited. But then, things shifted. Later that night, when everyone had been drinking, police believe that both Luke and Stephen began to make unwanted sexual advances toward Kaylee, and Kaylee, rightfully terrified, panicked. She tried to get away. Police believe that she ran from Luke Harlow's house, down the street, through side roads, anywhere she could go to get away. But Stephen Beadman chased her. And eventually, he caught up. And that moment, the one where the neighbor saw a man pinning a girl to the ground late at night in the cold, that was it. That was Kaylee. That was Stephen. And after that, no one saw her alive again. That one eyewitness, the neighbor who saw the struggle, told police they thought it was just a couple, a man and a woman, maybe on their way home from a night out. He said the girl was wearing either a dress or a skirt, something short. Her legs were bare, and in his mind, that made it seem casual, normal, like just another drunk couple fighting in the street at 3 a.m. But the police believed something different. They believed that girl was Kaylee, and she wasn't wearing a dress. She was wearing one of the men's baggy t-shirts, possibly Luke's or Steven Sand, nothing else. She was half dressed, most likely because they had tried to sexually assault her. She had run from the house, vulnerable and frightened, barefoot, exposed. And police believed that moment the one the neighbor saw was Stephen Beatman trying to assert control over her, maybe shouting at her, demanding she come back, maybe trying to convince her it was all a misunderstanding. He pinned her down, possibly to calm her, maybe to scare her, maybe worse. And then, just as suddenly, he got up and started walking away. But Kaylee didn't move. She was still on the ground, likely crying, shaking, confused. She had just been chased through the dark by a man nearly twice her age. So Stephen turned around, walked back over, pulled her up, held her hand, and they walked away together. To the neighbor, it looked like a couple making up after a fight. But to the police, it was something far more sinister. They believed Stephen never intended to take her back to the house. And although Luke Harlow had lied and deleted message gesturing to cover his own guilt and involvement, police ultimately believed he didn't participate in the murder. He likely knew a lot more than he admitted, but he wasn't there when Kaylee died. What the police pieced together was this. Kaylee and Stephen started to walk back toward Luke's flat. But somewhere along the way, they turned off the road. They didn't go back. Stephen led her somewhere else. And not long after that, Kaylee was gone. Stephen Beatman eventually pointed to a specific spot on a Mappa car park, just a few streets away from Luke Harlow's home. That, he said, was where he raped Kaylee Haywood. And from there, the two of them walked a long distance out of town, past homes, past safety toward an isolated, wooded area. That overgrown field where just hours later, Stephen would murder her and leave her body behind. She was just 15 years old. And within 4 days of her disappearance, the truth began to surface. Stephen Beatman, 28, was officially charged with rape and murder. Luke Harlow, 27, was charged with grooming and 2 counts of sexual activity with a child. The case of Kaylee Haywood was, on paper, now solved. But nothing about this story feels resolved, because it wasn't just a crime rate was a pattern. A consequence of how easily young girls can be targeted online, how quickly one message can spiral into manipulation, how predators use trust, not just force. And Kaylee, she was kind, she was bubbly. She loved her family, she loved her siblings, she posted pictures, she texted friends. She was just a girl full of life, full of plans. She deserved so much more. Yes, the case was officially solved. Kaylee's body had been found. Her killers had confessed, or at least enough evidence had proven what they'd done. Charges were filed. Justice, in the legal sense, had been set in motion. But for the police, something still didn't sit right. Stephen Beatman had done all of this too easily. There was something calculated in the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he lied. He showed no remorse, no panic, no emotional breakdown. It was cold, mechanical, as if he'd been through something like this before. So investigators dug deeper. They went through his house, room by room, seized his electronic keys, phone, computer, and another storage device. They ran his name through national databases, look at his employment history, his personal relationships, his digital footprint. And while they didn't find a physical criminal record, what they did find was chilling. On 3 separate devices, police discovered thousands of indecent images of children. Alongside that, his search history revealed an obsession with extreme and violent pornography, some of it so graphic, even seasoned investigators struggled to stomach it. This wasn't a man who had just snapped. This was someone whose mind had been slowly rotting with dark fantasies. Someone who had fed his urges in silence for years, someone for whom images had stopped being enough. And when the opportunity finally came to act on those urges though, turn sick thoughts into real-world horror, he did. Kaylee Haywood was not an accident. She was targeted. She was groomed, manipulated, and used as an outlet for something far more monstrous than anyone could have imagined. And in the end, she was murdered by someone who had likely been preparing for that moment far longer than anyone ever knew. Skip forward to June of the following year. It was time for Stephen Beedman and Luke Harlow to face justice to stand trial and be sentenced for the crimes they committed against Kaylee Haywood. And suddenly, Stephen Beedman changed. This man who had lied, denied, manipulated was now remorseful. He didn't want to face the courtroom, didn't want to hear the evidence laid out against him. He even tried to hide in his prison cell, refusing to leave, refusing to look the public or Kaylee's family in the eyes. He said he couldn't live with what he had done. And maybe that's true. Or maybe it was just the weight of knowing that his freedom and possibly his life was over. But either way, Stephen was silent, withdrawn, crumbling. Luke Harlow, on the other hand, was a different story. If you followed true crime cases before, you might know that defense lawyers almost always advise their clients not to take the stand. Especially in serious cases like murder, rape, grooming, the risk is too high. Because once you're on that stand, the prosecution can twist your words, dismantle your narrative, and use your own voice against you. But there's a certain type of person who ignores that advice. The arrogant ones, the narcissists, the ones who think they can out-talk everyone in the room, the ones who believe they still deserve the last word. And that was Luke Harlow. He chose to take the stand. And unsurprisingly, it only made things worse. He tried to cast himself as a victim, said that Stephen Beedman had used him to get close to Kaylee, that he had been manipulated, that he didn't know what was going to happen. He painted this image of Kaylee as his girlfriend, as if they had some kind of mutual relationship, as if she had chosen him. But not even on C did he express genuine sympathy for Kaylee. He didn't speak about her as a child. He didn't acknowledge what she went through, the terror, the betrayal, the pain. Because the truth is, Kaylee was never his girlfriend. She was a child, and he was a predator. In the end, Luke Harlow was found guilty of grooming and sexual activity with a child. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Stephen Beedman was found guilty of rape and murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 35 years before he'd even be considered for parole, though many believe he should never walk free again. Both men were also convicted of false imprisonment and perverting the course of justice for lying to police and obstructing the investigation. But even with both men behind bars, the pain didn't end. Not for Kaylee's family, not for her friends, not for the community that watched the whole nightmare unfold. But in the aftermath, something important was born. Together, Leicestershire police and Kaylee's parents created something called Kaylee's Love Story. It's not just a film, it's a warning, an education, and most of all, a legacy. The short film was shown in schools across the UK. It walks through the grooming process, how quickly and quietly it can happen, and the devastating consequences that can follow. It's not graphic, but it's real, and it's powerful. Because Kaylee's story is not just her own. It's the story of every child who's trusted the wrong person. Every parent who thought they knew what their kids were doing online. Every community who thought that could never happen here. And while nothing can undo what happened, this film has already saved lives. It has started conversations. It has given children the tools and confidence to speak up when something feels off. And in that way, Kaylee still has a voice.